My most difficult on-site job ever. I remember 2014 like it was 30 years ago. Wasn't 30 years ago, but sometimes it feels that way. And at the time, I had a customer named Martin. He was a super guy. I really kind of missed dealing with him. You know, he had a 300 SE cab. He was very smart. He was one of those people that in the car collecting hobby you just used to find, but they're just not there anymore. And, you know, there are proclivities that all of us have, but one of his specific proclivities was that he wanted a 220 Cabriolet A, which is a very attractive car. Now, he bought one from a gentleman in Virginia, and it had been painted green. I think it was originally light beige or white gray or some very post-war Mercedes color. And the car needed a lot of work. These cars had an ash wood frame for the body. So you had a giant structural X oval tube frame. It means you had a big oval with an X through the middle of it. And then Mercedes mounted the body on this thing. They mounted the suspension to it. They mounted the rear axle to it. I mean, it was a heavy piece of machinery, but on top of that frame was a beautiful handcrafted ash wood frame, and then they built the Cabriolet body over it. And this is a very pre-war construction method. So apart from its relatively modern M180 engine, this 220 Cab A W127 chassis, if you want to look it up, was a pre-war car. Now, there was one specialist in the United States that knew everything about these W187s, and his name was Bob Hi-Ho Silver, and he had a warehouse in Gardena, California. And at some point in time when Martin bought this car, he sent it all the way from Central Florida to Bob Silver, all the way in Gardena, which is near Manhattan Beach. It's near some other place that starts with an H. I can't remember, but it's a nice part of California. When you go towards the beach inland, it's a little industrial, but the car was there for like 9 years and there was no progress made. This guy was just billing and billing and billing and billing. He took all the chrome off, had the chrome done, and was sitting all boxed up. He had boxes and boxes of flathead screws. This guy was all into the cosmetic presentation. And so he had this book that the owners of Hill and Vaughn, who were an early player in the concours level automotive restoration field, they said things like all the flatheads and the screws should be aligned. You know, if you're going to wire a bolt, because a lot of pre-war cars used wired bolts, make sure that every wire wrap goes the same direction, has the same thickness, and that you don't change the wire. You need one continuous wire. You know, this is a very aircraft thing to do. Those cars thankfully didn't have that. They were more of a cotter-pinned car than a wired aircraft car. But this guy had been piddling, like the absolute epitome of the word piddling, away at this car for the last decade. So, of course, Martin said, you know, he hasn't been making any progress. And he knew me. He said, Pierre, you go out there, see if you can find all the pieces of the car, get it ready to ship, bring it back to your workshop. I was like, oh, this is so great. I'm so enthusiastic. I can't wait to do this. This is so exciting. I can't wait. I was so excited. I was like dancing for joy. I was so excited to go have a big boy job because in 2014, I was 30 years old. I don't even think I was 30 at the time this happened. I think I was 29. I was like, I'm a 29-year-old young man, and I'm going to Gardena, California, to go get this car in pieces. This pretty much pre-war car. I was like beside myself. So I flew out there, you know, with my suitcase and my camera and everything. I had to photograph everything. And so I get to Bob's workshop, and what an insane place. So first of all, Bob was like 84 years old. He was very old. And I like the fact he was old, but he worked by himself. Working by yourself at 84 years old is really not, it's just not tenable. Bob worked at night. He was a 100% full-blooded nocturne. He came in between 8 and 9 p.m. and left around 5 o'clock in the morning. He worked all night and slept all day. I said, why did you do this, Bob? He said, the traffic. You know, not a bad way to live. He had a clapped out Lexus LS 400. And he would just drive to his warehouse and piddle away on these cars. I said, do you have any other customers? No, Martin's the only customer I have. But he had a bunch of cars there. He had a brown 220 Cab B. He had a 300S W128 chassis, 300S in medium gray with red interior. What a beautiful car. And the engine was sitting next to it on a pallet. He had a 220 coupe, a W187 coupe. There were not 100 of these things made, and it was even rarer than that. It had a sunroof. This is like one of 27 cars with a hand crank sunroof in it from like 1953. I mean, just some stuff, you know, you couldn't believe. And so I had to sit there because there was Martin's car in the middle of this whole thing, all taken apart. Every piece of chrome wrapped up in tissue paper. To find every piece of chrome. So I had to look at one car, compare it to another car, say, okay, here's Martin's piece of chrome because it matches the chrome in this other car. Here's this piece of really obscure, weird fitting chrome that I can't find another one out of because I see it wrapped up in tissue paper. It's missing on this car, and here it is in another car. So I used another 220 Cab A in the workshop to figure out everything I was going to need. And I like just thinking about it makes me exhausted. The mental task, the mental challenge of this was just so excruciating. And so I didn't tell you guys the next part of this whole insane thing. I had to get the car to run and then drive it to a shipping checkpoint 10 miles away from Bob's shop. This car had not run in like 20 plus years. I had to take the carburetor apart and clean it, flush the fuel, flush all the coolant, you know, change the oil, take out the oil screen, adjust the valves, do all this stuff to get the freaking car to run, make the brakes work, you know, get the shift linkage to work. I mean, all this is just crazy. This is stuff as a 41-year-old man I would probably, unfortunately or fortunately, I would not attempt today. So when I was halfway through the week, I was like, am I even going to be able to finish this? I had 1 week to do this. Find all these parts. I thought to myself, maybe I can bolt some of the chrome pieces on, you know. So I said, I'll deal with the attaching chrome next. I'll find all of it, put it in the car, then get the car running. So I spent 2 days getting the car running. And the car actually ran well enough. It ran well enough to drive. Did the brakes work? Yes, they worked. They were scary, but they worked because they're mechanical single circuit. Well, they're not fully mechanical. They're hydraulic single circuit unboosted drums. Did the car run okay? Yeah, it ran okay with a little bit of choke on, you know, because the carburetor was still gummed up. But I got it there. I got it to run and drive in traffic, and it made it to the shipping depot. One of the scariest rides of my life because the tires were all flat spotted. I mean, I had to be crazy to do this. The car didn't even have a valid tag on it. You know, and I'm going 10 miles through Los Angeles, like the perimeter of Los Angeles. I don't know. I mean, this is one of those points in your life when you say, God must have been watching out for me. You know, my guardian angel must have been sitting in the passenger seat next to me because there is absolutely no way that I should have been able to accomplish all of it. But now I started to try to attach some chrome pieces, and I didn't have the hardware I needed, and I gave up. So when I got to the shipping depot, I basically wrapped the car up in plastic. They loaded the car, and they shipped it to my shop. So I start stripping the car apart, taking everything apart, laying out all the chrome. My brother was helping me at the time. And I said, you know, maybe we'll see what happens if we try to put some of this stuff together. I sit there trying to attach the chrome sill plates, screwing screws in. Screws turn, but it's like there's nothing there. There's a thick layer of paint, green paint over it. I'm like, what's under this paint? So I take some of the paint off. For 9 years, Bob Silver had been screwing chrome pieces into rotten wood. The entire ash frame of the car was rotten. The whole body needed to be dissected like a sardine can to be restructuralized. So there was wood underneath the metal. So my next call was to Kirschinger and Son. Took me all this time. Research. I find a guy in Germany, Christoph Kirschinger, 187 specialist in pre-war Mercedes. Ja, Herr Kirschinger, mein Deutsch ist nicht gut. Sprecht du English? And he goes to me, let me get my son. So his son gets on the phone. That's what I love about Europe. You don't get a choice. You go into the family business, or else your family disowns you. And the son gets on the phone. We talk in English and whatever. His English is pretty good. I bought all of the ash structural pieces for the car. But then another problem occurred. I had no body at the time. I didn't have Austin miles. I had nobody at the time that could help me put the structure together of the car. So Martin goes, well, it's simple. Why not just adjust the turnbuckles in the doors to make the doors go up? And this is where I realized what had happened here. It's not Martin's fault, because Bob had misled him about how key the wood frame was to the structure of the car. Bob had said something like, oh yeah, the wood's just there for all the chrome trim to attach to. No. It supports the windshield pillar, the door frame, the side. The wood was the side impact protection. It was what the doors latched onto. It was what held the door hinges to the body. It wasn't a little bit of wood here and there like the Zebrano wood on the Dacia 123. This was the structural frame of the car. And when we figured out we didn't have the skills to put it together, I told Martin, I said, the best thing I can do for you, instead of lying to you and saying I'm going to help you, because I tried dozens of times. I tried to get many body shops to help me. They wouldn't help me. The car ended up going to Henry Magno. Henry was, because he retired, the foremost specialist in the W187 cars in the United States. He was the real one. Bob was the pretend version, and Henry was the real one, because Henry had to take the whole car apart and basically restore the whole thing from scratch. But I learned a couple of valuable lessons here. First of all, with really expensive restorations like this, why do people do them? I'm still trying to understand why, because there wasn't a clear-cut reason. As soon as this car was done, it went up for sale. It was not finished to the extent that Henry thought it should have been, I should say. It was good. Like everything is structurally done. The paint was done. The car was nice. But Henry still thought there was more work to do. But I still think he was proud of it. I still think that there was a very good result. But every time I talked to Henry, it was like, we got it done well enough. We put all this stuff in. I don't know. I think Henry was probably overly critical of his own work, because he was really an outstanding guy. And sometimes when you're very good at something, you tend to look at your own work very harshly. But I never got to see the car again. The life cycle of cars like that is they get found by, usually a dealer sells them to an aspiring individual. They go to the wrong shop. The owner spends a ton of money. Nothing gets done. They go to the right shop. They spend a ton more money. They lose a bunch of time, and then the car gets sold at a loss. And that was exactly what happened with this car. People just don't enjoy pre-war cars. I love pre-war cars. If you have an old pre-war Mercedes and you need a home for it and it's really cheap, I'll buy it from you. I'll drive it. I love pre-war cars. I love cars from the 40s. I love cars from the 50s. I love cars that are not easy to drive because instead of the way I look at it and the way that I looked at it then, people ask me, why did you take on a project like this? People see these things two ways. Typical car guy, the typical testosterone injecting Porsche owner goes to himself. They compare it to all the ways it is not a modern car. They look at it and they say, these are all the car's deficiencies that separate it from modern cars. But because I'm kind of most of the time kind of a nice person, you know, I like to think of myself sort of like, you know, a person who sees the best in everything. I look for the ways that it does things better or feels better or represents the concept of motoring better than a modern car. I like the idea of a column shift manual. I like the idea of operating a choke. I like the idea of hearing all the mechanical noises from the gearbox and the engine. I like the idea of the goofy but extremely comfortable swing X. I like all this stuff. So I liked that car. Well, I wanted the idea of restoring it because I knew I couldn't own one, but I wanted the experience of driving one. So here we are. Thank you for watching it all the way through. Please like, share, and subscribe. Tap the bell for notifications, and I will see you in the future.